What is depression? Neurobiology explained simply. Picture this. You wake up in the morning and the world seems to have lost all its colors. Coffee has no smell, the sun provides no warmth, and your favorite music sounds like white noise. You think, I'm probably just baby. But what if I told you that in this moment, your brain has literally changed? That neurons have stopped communicating with each other the way they used to? 1 in every 20 people on the planet suffers from depression. This means that right now, more than 300 million people are living with an altered brain. We're not talking about weakness of character or bad mood. We're talking about what happens when the most complex biological machine in your head starts functioning differently. Why can someone who was enjoying life yesterday not force themselves to get out of bed today? What's happening in those 3 pounds of neural tissue that define who we are? Let's find out. Today we're talking about depression, and I promise, after this video you'll never again say, just don't be sad. Why is this topic so important? Depression has become the second leading cause of disability worldwide. It affects not only the person who's ill, but everyone around them. Family, friends, colleagues. Yet most people still don't understand the difference between sadness and clinical depression. What will you learn from this video? First, how depression fundamentally differs from ordinary emotions. Second, what exactly happens in your brain when this condition develops. Third, how the famous depressive triad manifests. The 3 main symptoms that doctors look for when diagnosing. And finally, why understanding the neurobiology of depression helps not only treat it, but also removes the stigma around mental disorders. We won't discuss treatment. That's what specialists are for. We'll talk about what happens in the brain, in simple terms, with concrete examples. Because knowledge is the first step to understanding, and understanding leads to acceptance and support. So, what is depression from a neurobiological perspective? Part 1. Differences between sadness and clinical depression. Let's start with the most important question. How does depression differ from sadness? Imagine that emotions are the weather in your inner world. Sadness is a rainy day. Unpleasant, wet, makes you want to stay home. But you know, tomorrow the sun will shine. Depression is when it rains for months and you've forgotten what the sky looks like without clouds. Sadness always has a cause. A breakup, failure at work, losing a loved one. It's a normal psychological reaction to stress. You feel sad, you grieve, maybe you cry, but after some time, the pain dulls. Life returns to its normal course. Depression is different. Sometimes it appears without apparent causes. A person wakes up and realizes the world is turned gray. But the main difference isn't in the presence or absence of a cause, but in how the brain processes information. In depression, 3 key psychological functions are disrupted. This is called the depressive triad. First, hypothymia, or persistently lowered mood. Not just sadness, but a state where joy is physically inaccessible. Imagine your happiness radio receiver is broken. Second, bradyphrenia, or slowed thinking. Thoughts seem to move through molasses. A person takes a long time finding the right words, has trouble concentrating, forgets simple things. This isn't laziness or stupidity, it's altered brain function. Third, hypobulia, decreased willpower and activity. The simplest actions require enormous effort. Getting out of bed becomes heroic, and taking a shower becomes an impossible task. A key symptom of depression is anhedonia. This is the inability to experience pleasure from things that used to bring joy. Favorite hobbies stop being interesting, delicious food seems tasteless. Socializing with friends becomes exhausting. This isn't whimsy, it's the result of brain changes. It's important to note, in sadness, a person retains the ability to be distracted, laugh, experience pleasure. In depression, this ability is blocked at the neurobiological level. Now we'll understand why this happens. Another criterion is time. Sadness is measured in days or weeks. Depression in months. If symptoms of the depressive triad are present for more than 2 weeks and interfere with normal life, this is clinical depression. Why is this important to understand? Because when we tell someone with depression, just smile or look at the world more positively, it's like asking someone with a broken bone to just don't limp. The brain in depression works differently, and that's a scientific fact. Part 2. Statistics and scope of the problem. Now let's talk about scale. If depression were a country, it would be the 4th most populous after China, India, and the United States. More than 300 million people live with this condition right now. But what's especially important, these numbers are growing. Over recent decades, the number of depression cases has increased dramatically. Why? There are several theories. Perhaps we've gotten better at diagnosing this condition. Or maybe modern life creates more conditions for depression development. Think about the pace of our lives. Constant stress, information overload, social media where everyone looks happier than you, economic instability. Our brains evolved for life in small groups in a relatively predictable environment. And now they process more information each day than our ancestors did in their entire lives. The pandemic showed how fragile our mental health is. The number of depressive episodes increased by almost 30%. Isolation, uncertainty, fear for the future, all this became a catalyst for those predisposed to depression. Interesting fact, women suffer from depression twice as often as men. This is related to hormonal differences, social roles, and how society accepts emotional expression. Men also get depression but often hide symptoms or express them through aggression and alcohol abuse. The most vulnerable group is young people from 20 to 25 years old. This is a time of major changes, finishing education, starting careers, first serious relationships. The brain is still forming, but stresses are already plentiful. Moreover, young people often don't seek help, considering depression a temporary condition. Depression has become the leading cause of disability worldwide. This means economic losses in the trillions of dollars annually. A person with depression cannot fully work, study, or care for family. This affects all of society. But there's good news too. Depression is one of the most studied mental disorders. New diagnostic and treatment methods appear every year. Understanding neurobiological mechanisms helps develop more effective approaches. It's important to remember, depression doesn't choose victims by social status, education, or income. It can affect anyone, from students to CEOs, from homemakers to celebrities. It's not a sign of weakness, but an illness that requires understanding and treatment. Now, let's move to the most interesting part. What happens in the brain when depression develops? Part 3. Neurobiological foundations of depression. Imagine the brain as a huge city with billions of residents, neurons. They communicate with each other through chemical signals, creating a complex network of roads and bridges. In depression, some districts of this city seem to disconnect from the general network, while traffic in others becomes too intense. Let's start with the main districts of the brain involved in depression. First, the prefrontal cortex, your internal manager. It's responsible for planning, decision-making, emotional control. In depression, activity in this area decreases. This is why it becomes difficult to concentrate, plan your day, or control negative thoughts. The second important player, the limbic system, the brain's emotional center. Here lies the amygdala, which handles fear and anxiety processing. In depression, it becomes hyperactive. Imagine a security system that's triggered and now sees threats everywhere, even in harmless situations. The third participant, the hippocampus, memory storage. During prolonged depression, it can shrink in size. This explains the memory and concentration problems that many people with depression experience. But the most interesting thing happens at the level of brain chemistry. Neurons communicate using special substances, neurotransmitters. It's like the city's postal system. Messages are packaged in envelopes and delivered to addresses. In depression, 3 key mail carriers malfunction. First, serotonin, responsible for mood and well-being. When there's too little, the world seems gray and joyless. Second, dopamine, the neurotransmitter of motivation and pleasure. When it's deficient, interest in life disappears. Third, noradrenaline, linked to energy and concentration. Its imbalance leads to fatigue and attention problems. It's important to understand, this isn't simply lack of happiness hormones, as often oversimplified. This is a complex disruption in neural network function. Some brain areas work too actively, others insufficiently. Connections between them weaken. There's another important mechanism, neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt. In depression, it decreases. The brain seems stuck in negative thinking patterns and can't escape them. Good news, neuroplasticity can be restored with proper treatment. Interestingly, the brain in depression begins operating in default mode, network mode. This is a network that activates when we're not focused on anything. Normally, it helps process information and plan. In depression, it becomes hyperactive and generates negative, obsessive thoughts. Imagine a radio stuck on one station with interference. Instead of music, you only hear noise. That's roughly how the brain works in depression. It gets stuck on negative thoughts and can't switch to something positive. Understanding these mechanisms is important because it shows depression isn't imagination, not laziness, and not character weakness. These are real changes in brain function that can be measured and studied. Part 4. The depressive triad in detail. Now let's examine in detail how all these neurobiological changes manifest in real life through the depressive triad. These are the 3 pillars supporting depression diagnosis. The first pillar, hypothymia, or persistently lowered mood. But this isn't simple sadness. Imagine you have an internal emotional thermostat and it's broken. Now it can only show temperatures below 0, no matter how hard you try to adjust it. A person with hypothymia wakes up in the morning already heavy-hearted. The day hasn't started yet, but mood is already at 0. Good news doesn't bring joy, compliments don't inspire, achievements seem insignificant. This happens because the brain systems responsible for positive emotions are disrupted. Important feature: in depression, mood practically doesn't depend on external events. If a healthy person is sad about being fired, but can cheer up from meeting friends, in depression, even the most pleasant events don't change emotional background. The second pillar, bradyphrenia, slowed thinking. The brain seems to switch to energy-saving mode. Thoughts form slowly, concentration scatters, memory fails. A person might spend several minutes looking for the right word or forget why they entered a room. This is especially noticeable in conversation. The person thinks for a long time before answering, Speech becomes slower and more monotonous. At work, productivity decreases. Tasks that used to take an hour now take half a day. Students with depression often complain they can't concentrate on studies. They read the same page several times, but information doesn't stick. This isn't laziness. It's the result of changes in the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. The third pillar, hypobulia, decreased willpower and motivation. Imagine your internal battery has drained to critical minimum. Every action requires enormous effort, as if you're moving underwater. Getting out of bed in the morning becomes heroic. Taking a shower becomes a trial. Making breakfast becomes an impossible task. These aren't tantrums or being spoiled. Brain centers responsible for motivation and initiative work in slow motion. People with hypobulia often describe this as an internal brake or invisible chains. They understand they need to do something but can't force themselves to start. This creates additional guilt and self-blame. All three components of the triad reinforce each other. Bad mood slows thinking. Slow thinking reduces motivation, and lack of motivation worsens mood. It becomes a vicious cycle that's difficult to escape alone. Physical symptoms often accompany the depressive triad. Sleep disturbances. A person either can't fall asleep, wakes up in the middle of the night, or sleeps too much. Appetite changes. Complete loss of interest in food, or conversely, stress eating. Physical fatigue that doesn't pass after rest. Understanding the depressive triad helps not only specialists diagnose, but also helps people themselves understand what's happening to them. This isn't personal failure, but symptoms of an illness that can and should be treated. Conclusion. So, we've taken a journey into the depths of the human brain and learned that depression isn't simply bad mood, but a complex neurobiological condition. We discovered that in depression, key brain structure function changes, neurotransmitter balance is disrupted, and the depressive triad forms. Three main symptoms that fundamentally change a person's life. The most important thing to remember: depression is a brain illness, not personal weakness. When we understand neurobiological mechanisms, we can relate more compassionately to those who face this, including ourselves. Knowledge is power. The power to help a loved one, the power to seek help in time, the power to destroy stereotypes and stigma around mental disorders. Every time someone says, "Just stop being sad," you can now explain why that's impossible. If you recognized yourself or loved ones in the described symptoms, remember, depression is treatable. Modern medicine offers many effective methods, from psychotherapy to medication. The main thing: don't stay silent and don't endure. Subscribe if you want to learn more about how our amazing brain works. In upcoming videos, we'll explore anxiety mechanisms, stress nature, and many other topics that will help better understand ourselves and others. Give a like if the video was helpful, share with those who might benefit. Remember, understanding is the first step to change. See you in the next video.